All right, so MSW, uh, people who receive an MSW are trained on how people cope with and really overcome any problems in their lives. And an MSW is really an umbrella term, and or within an MSW, there's that you can do with it. So they're prepared for social work positions, either local, state, or national government, and also as well as a lot of nonprofit and private organizations. If you want to provide therapy, a master's degree is, or if you want to provide therapy and pursuing a clinical route, a master's degree is definitely required.
Here we listed a couple of things that you should consider before actually beginning the application process of an MSW. So the first thing you should consider is the length of the program and the cost. Most programs take 2 years, but there may be options to modify for 1 year or 3 years. And the difference between 1 year and 3 years is that 1 year will more than likely consist of a heavier and longer workload compared to 3 years where the work is spread apart and it'll take a little bit longer. Another thing to consider is cost. Post-grad programs are very expensive. So it's something to consider when you're applying. Not only are you spending money on tuition, but you're also spending money on the application itself and exams that you have to take. The next thing to consider is how your program would be conducted. There's multiple ways that your program could be conducted. It could be either in person, which is typically the teaching that you're used to, virtual, which all of you are now getting to, or hybrid, which is a mix of both in-person and virtual. So it really depends on your style of learning and what you would prefer for your program. The next thing to consider is your internship placement opportunities. So what partnerships does your school have in order for you to complete internship hours? And if your school doesn't have any internship opportunities, where would you find them and how to go about finding those hours? Or how to complete those hours, excuse me. And the last thing to consider is how many hours of internship are required for your program. Some range from hundreds of hours, and it just depends on your program, how many hours you're gonna have to dedicate in order to complete your program. So some questions to take in consideration: when will you start your hours? Will it be the first year that you're in the program? Will it be the second? And the next thing to also consider, will you be able to keep working your regular job? So hours within your program can consume a lot of your time. So you need to really know if you're going to be working full-time outside of your program internship hours that you'll have to complete.
So some of there are different concentrations that you can pursue. So some of them, just to give a few, are children, youth, and family, mental health, school social work innovation, healthcare, and adults and aging. So if you are thinking of pursuing clinical social work in order to provide therapy, there are additional requirements that you have to do. So first of all, you have to be registered with the Board of Behavioral Sciences. Also, you have to have 3,000 supervised clinical hours. And there's additional coursework as well. Lastly, you do have to be licensed by the state. There's also the application process is pretty straightforward, just like any other graduate program that you're going to have to pursue. So you have to do the application, you have to submit your transcripts, you will have to do either different questions or different types of essays. You will need a letter of recommendation. You have to pursue, you would have to send in your resume. You have to make sure that you also complete your financial aid application. And we'll talk a little bit more about scholarships in the next upcoming slides. And then your GRE. So there are some programs that your GRE is required, and some programs aren't. So it really kind of just depends on the different universities or different programs that you decide to pursue. And as far as some of the other ones, it's just important to really get feedback from different people as far as who you want your recommenders to be. It's something that we've covered in our previous webinars. If you've joined us before, make sure that you know this person for several years and they can really attest to your growth. Make sure that your resume has been revised, and just make sure that your essays also have been proofread by other people besides yourself, so you can get an outside perspective of some of the things that you want within those resumes.
As Gus mentioned, the GRE is possibly required for your program. However, most MSW programs do not ask for or require your GRE scores. There are some instances where your program may feel that an application is lacking, whether it's in your GPA or maybe lacking experience, and they can possibly ask for GRE scores. Now, I'll do a quick overview of what the GRE is. It stands for Graduate Record Examination. And a couple of details about the examination is that it's starts off at a price of $205, so it's pretty pricey. There's an asterisk sign next to that price because sometimes it varies if a program is asking for more detailed examination scores, that may vary in price. The exam is offered on a computer base and also on a paper base. So computer-based tests are offered year-round, while paper-based exams are only offered 3 times a year. You're allowed to retake exams every 21 days. You can retake the GRE. I wouldn't recommend it because that's a lot of money. I would recommend you study really hard the first time and try your best. And you can retake the exam up to 5 times in 1 calendar year. Also, something to take into consideration before taking the GRE is that it takes about 3 hours, 45 minutes long. It's divided into 6 sections. The sections are as follows on the side over here. You can see on the chart, there's analytical writing section, there's a verbal reasoning section, and a quantitative reasoning section. As you can see, each section is divided into a specific number of questions and also the time that is allowed for each section.
For all MSW requirements, for all MSW programs, a bachelor's degree is required, obviously, from an accredited university. So any university that you're only attending is accredited. You do have to have a minimum GPA of a 3.0 for those of you that are based out of a 4.0 scale. Ideally, you want to have at least a 3.0 GPA. And you do have to have some type of prereqs. So you want to have a minimum of 18 units of different liberal arts coursework from like humanities classes, either anthropology, communication studies, social sciences, biological sciences, and natural sciences. So if you do know that you want to pursue an MSW program, or at least are interested in one, it's important to make sure that you take some of these classes. If not, then you might have to take some of these classes either in a community college before you're able to qualify for a program. And like Bridget mentioned, GRE schools are always not required or rated depending on the program that you end up pursuing. Some other additional requirements, you always have to make sure that you're dedicated to the profession. So, being in social work isn't always easy. So you have to make sure that you have a strong interest in it, that you're motivated, that you're committed to the communities that you're going to be working with. So you have to definitely have a strong appreciation for cultural and ethnic diversity. You want to have a good background you want to be able to promote social justice and equal access to different resources. Some personal qualifications that you want to have is you want to make sure that you establish a type of sensitivity and responsiveness in the relationships that you're going to be building during these programs. And usually they do want you to have some type of experience. So they want you to have either 1 or 2 years of social work related experience or any type of volunteer experience. So if you don't have that when you're pursuing your MSW program, it's important that you're doing it while you're in your MSW program, either through volunteer work, different types of internship or things like that. So these are just some summaries of some admission requirements that have. So as you can see, we've established a little bit about the GPA requirements. So depending on what you want to do, we mentioned a little about the 3.0 GPA that you want to pursue. And in some cases, you can have a 3.0 GPA if you're doing some type of distance education. And like we mentioned, some of the prereqs are either elementary statistics with a letter of a C or higher. We're going to let some of our panelists talk a little bit more about some of the requirements for the MSW program.
All right. And here are some tips on how to prepare and know if you're really ready for an MSW. So regardless on the concentration that you end up going into in your program, any social work role is a helping profession and centered around people. So we've listed a few things that you can do to really know if social work is for you. So as of now, you can start volunteering, and there's multiple places where you can volunteer. It can be back in your elementary school, or maybe a high school, or a retirement home. Knowing that you can communicate and be around people and offer any help and support that you can actually help you prepare for being in a social work program. You can also mentor, intern, join a student group at your school, conduct informational interview, And a little bit about an informational interview is when you interview someone that's in the career, and in this specific career, social work. So you can interview a social worker or anyone within the field and ask them questions about how they got into the field that they got into, and just ask them any specific questions that you may have about being in social work. And right now that you're in college, you can also take additional social science classes that are related to the concentration that you eventually want to get into.
All right, so these are just some scholarships and fellowships. I know what we touched on it a little bit earlier. So for MSW programs, you usually don't find fellowships until after you finish the program, but there are some scholarships we were able to dig up some resources for you guys. So for example, if you pursue, we were able to find a merit scholarship for the USC MSW program, and they can range anywhere between $10,000 to $40,000. Also, we were able to find the NASW Foundation Consuelo Gaza Memorial Scholarship, and that ranges anywhere between $2,000 to $4,000. Some of the things we were also able to see was the CSWE, the Council on Social Work Education. Sometimes we are able to provide you different types of resources, and also Social Work Heals and they provide either experience in order to be able to really foster leadership skills within the scholars. And some fellowships. Some fellowships for like I mentioned, usually post MSW, and we found a fellowship specifically for Berkeley and for clinical social work. UCLA, their Luskin School of Public Affairs has a leadership development and senior fellows program. So what they do is they bring you in and they pair you up with a mentor that's essentially able to guide you and really help you determine which field, which concentration you want to get into. And for the UCLA specifically, this one actually isn't post as MSW, so you can do it while you're pursuing your MSW program at UCLA. So that was actually a very unique aspect of it. And then we also found the Boston Children's Hospital MSW training program that is able to provide you different types of resources as well.
And if you're wondering what type of careers you can get into with a master's in social work, we listed some of the most popular and common careers that we know of. So a school social worker, a marriage and family counselor, substance use and treatment counselor, a medical social worker, foster care social worker, and also a policy analyst. And even if it may come to a surprise, but what we do here at Fulfillment Fund is also considered social work. We're helping students, we're helping you with resources and anything that you need.
All right, great. So this is just some of the resources that we found our information from.
So I am a professional fundraising consultant, but I didn't start there. I started actually as a frontline social worker. I worked in the fields of substance abuse and mental health with adolescents. I worked in foster care for a while and held a variety of positions in different social work fields, and then decided to get my master's degree at NYU. So I finished that in 2008, and then I went to work for a children's hospital for a little while. And then from there, I sort of landed in the career that I'm in now, which is grant writing. So I help nonprofits raise money to do the work that they do. So I help generate funding to help social workers do the jobs that they do out in the field. So that's my sort of career in a nutshell. And I did, again, my undergraduate degree was actually in sociology and not in social work. So one of those fields that you were talking about earlier in the introduction, but it definitely relates and, helped me towards pursuing my MSW. So.
Great, thank you so much, Leah.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll continue with Dorothy. Dorothy, do you mind introducing yourself to our students? Give us a brief 2 to 3 minute bio of what program you were a part of and what you're currently doing in your career.
Yeah. I'm Dorothy Fleischer. I currently direct a grant making program for the WM Keck Foundation. The program awards between $4 and $6 million a year and supports all kinds of nonprofits in Los Angeles County that are involved in arts, healthcare, education, and health and social services. I graduated from City College in New York. I got a degree in psychology and social work. And then I worked for 2 years before pursuing my master's degree, a year in the Children's Bureau, which is really the foster care agency in New York City. And then I worked for San Francisco General Hospital. So I had healthcare background and child welfare background. Then I got my master's at Berkeley in a program called Community Mental Health because the field was beginning to change. After that, I moved to Wyoming. So I spent a year in the state Department of Aging, and I went around the state really talking to communities about setting up programs for older people. Then I taught at the university for 2 years, and as you hear about my trajectory, you can see all the opportunities that are available with a social work degree, and that life takes you in unexpected places. I came back to LA to get a doctorate in social work from USC, and then I worked for a number of years on the field faculty at USC supervising social work students. Then I worked for United Way for close to 15 years before coming to the Keck Foundation.
My name is Rochelle, and thank you so much for inviting me to this. I'm also very excited. So right now I'm a program specialist, a child's foster care certifier working in Portland. But I was born and raised in Southern California. So in about 2002, I worked as an early interventionist with children with developmental disabilities in home. And I did that as I got my undergrad in psychology at Cal State Northridge. After I did that, I moved to San Diego, and I took about 6 years off to really continue to work in the field and also kind of decide which way I wanted to go for graduate school. So I continue to work with people with or children with disabilities in different capacities. There was, like I said, in home. There was education in the hospitals, Children's Hospital. And then from there, I decided to get my master's at USC. And there was a San Diego campus at the time. So it was a smaller cohort, and I have my concentrations in mental health. While getting my MSW, I continued to work full time. I went to the 3-year program. And during that time, I had 2 internships, one as working as a mental health professional, and the other one was working at the Children's Hospital in the emergency department. After I graduated with my MSW from USC, I applied to the USC program, the International UK program. And I then worked as a child welfare social worker in England for 2.5 years and got my certificate in international social work. From there, I came to Portland, where I've been for the last 3.5 years. And that brings me to where I am today.
So can you tell us a little bit about how you were able to finance your graduate program? Were you able to receive any scholarships? Was it loans? Was it out of pocket? What was that process?
So yes, they were all loans. And I went to USC, so it's a private school and it's very expensive. I was able to get into, I was accepted into other, of course I wanted USC because they were ranked really high and I wanted a really good education. And I got it, but I also got the school loans. And so, and to be honest, yeah, it's all school loans and I also work full time. So I only had to take out the tuition loans and not the living loans. So that's how I did it. But I would definitely recommend really understanding the loans that you're getting yourself into. Because to be honest, I didn't really think about it. I thought, oh, I got approved. I'm just gonna go ahead and deal with it later because I'm gonna have my master's and make a lot of money. But it's important to understand in the field of the social work, you have to really understand what your options are and potentially the salary included in that. So I would definitely recommend understanding your loans and really making a plan on how you're gonna pay them back after you graduate.
Great, thank you. Let's do Leah, same question.
Yeah, it's so funny, as you were talking, Rochelle, I very much agreed with your experience that for me, with paying for school, I too took out a bunch of loans. I did qualify for some financial aid, but I also went to a private school, which was very expensive in a very expensive city to live in. And so I took out the maximum that I could take out in terms of loans. And I also worked while I was in school. My first year, I waited tables to help pay for my living expenses, basically, because school was covered, tuition was covered by my loans and financial aid. And then my second year, I actually ended up getting a paid internship that I was able to turn into a work study, which ended up benefiting me greatly. Because I got some credit for actually working. And so that internship, I was actually working for a documentary filmmaker, and we made films about social issues. So at the time we were working on a film about the aftermath of 9/11. So this was back in the mid 2000s when I was in grad school. But so that was a really unique opportunity that I was able to have, which didn't necessarily help me finance, but definitely helped in terms of not having to accrue additional costs for school, and to get some credit for the work that I was actually doing at the time. So that was primarily how I paid for it. But I completely agree with what Rochelle said about kind of walking out of school with a tremendous amount of debt that I did not realize on the front end. And again, living in an expensive city like New York or LA, I had been living alone, and I had to get roommates after that because I couldn't afford to live alone anymore. And my student loans came due a lot quicker than I thought they would. So I graduated, and then like 2 months later, I started getting these bills to pay them back. And so I ended up doing a little bit of creative stuff. Like I ended up deferring for a little while until I could get on my feet a little bit better financially. I ended up leaving New York and moving to North Carolina for a little while. And then I moved out to California to kind of help minimize some of my expenses in that way. But yeah, it was a high dollar item for sure. But in the end, totally worth it. I mean, like Dorothy was saying, like the level of experience and the opportunities that I've been able to have because I have an MSW, it's definitely opened a lot of doors, and I've gotten to do a lot of really creative stuff with it. Not just in the realm of what people traditionally think about as a clinical social worker sitting in a room, communicating and talking with someone, but having a lot of broad life experience. So, it's a trade-off for sure, but definitely I agree with what Rochelle said, like on the front end, to think about how you're going to pay it back, because a lot of social work careers, especially when you first get out of school, don't pay very well. That's sort of, we're all these bleeding hearts and we want to do good in the world, and those jobs don't often pay what the CEOs of corporations make. So that's definitely something to be aware of.
All right, and then let's bring it home. So Dorothy, same question. And you, in addition to having your MSW from Berkeley, got your doctorate degree from USC as well. So how were you able to finance that?
Well, I went to school at a different time when our government really thought if you got an education and you promised to pay it forward by working in the field, you were eligible for scholarships. So I really got scholarships both at my master's level and at the PhD level. So when you think about it, one of the things, there are certain, if you work for an organization like the Department of Children and Family Services that need social workers, there are different kinds of stipends. They may even pay part of your tuition or pay for you to go to school. We know in the mental health field, there's going to be a great demand for social workers. So some of it is really taking a look at the fields that pay more. So when you think about what schools to go to, and you think about the loans you might want to take, you also might think about, are there ways to get these organizations to pay for you to go, or to give you stipends, and then you can go to work for them for really better paying jobs. And then the other thing is, one of the great things about social workers are community organizers. Mm-hmm. So if we ever get out of the pandemic, you can organize, institute really stipends for people, or it's almost like forgivable loans. They have that for physicians. If you work in community clinics in medically underserved areas, your loans could be reduced. I don't know what happens in the field of social work because I haven't looked at it, but that's the wonderful thing about social work. You can go get a placement and do community organizing as part of the placement and try to change the world.
Great, thank you. And I also want to encourage our students to please ask any questions in the chat box. And if you do, I'd be more than happy to ask any of our panelists. They can either be general questions for all of them or specific questions for individuals. So please ask questions. This is for you. So I'll be more than happy to hear that.
Can I just add one thing? I forgot to mention. Talk what Dorothy said. It reminded me. Yeah. So just to be clear, I'm on the income-based repayment plan, and what that is they calculate how much money, like how much salary I make, depending on where I live in the country. And there's a certain there is some flexibility with the loans. And if I work for a nonprofit or government agency for 10 years while paying my loans on time, the rest will be forgiven. So I just wanted to also let you guys know that.
Yeah, that's completely true. If you're working like in different fields and different sectors, you can get your loan forgiven. And a lot of times, like Rochelle mentioned, you can basically pay the bare minimum for the 10 years, and then from there, anything that's left over is forgiven. So it's always an important thing to consider when pursuing these degrees. Yes, you might have a lot of loans in the meantime, but ultimately, it's definitely going to be worthwhile. Rochelle, I have a question for you. You mentioned that you had 2 internships while you were in your program. How did you feel that impacted the trajectory of your career?
It was really helpful for me to have those internships because I was able to, again, work with people in different capacity. And it really gave me a better understanding of what direction I wanted to go. And it also gave me connections to the people, professional connections to the people I was working with. So after I graduated, I was offered a position at the Children's Hospital, actually. So that was really helpful.
And follow-up question, how did you end up hearing about these internships or end up getting these internships?
Yeah, it was through my school. It was through USC. They actually set up the internships for you.
Great.
Well, they give you options and you have to interview for them.
Dorothy, I have a question for you. So I noticed from your bio that you're a part of several networks currently. So I think you're the co-convener of the Education Funders Group, founder and member of the LA Partnership for Early Childhood Investment, and I can go on and on. But so what led you to pursue being part of these different networks, different organizations, in addition to your day-to-day work?
Well, I think in order to be an effective grant maker, you really have to understand what's happening in the field. And that means networking with other organizations, other people that are seeing different things, and then really think about what kind of information might we all want to be privy to that would help us do a better job. So that's really what led me to join those groups. And then to see if there was, opportunity for leverage and learning, but it was really to be more effective in my job. The way the field of funders has shifted, and probably Leah may comment on this as well, is there's much more collaboration among grant makers, I'd say, at least in Los Angeles in the last 5 to 10 years. There are more pooled funds being established. So that's, a different way that the field is working, because some funders make small grants, but to magnify the impact, you can make several different grants. But I think for students thinking about it, there's so many opportunities to continue to expand your social network and your learning. And when you expand your social network, that's the way you can move on in your field.
Great, thank you. And then Leah, a question for you. So I know you mentioned that, you didn't start off in grants, right? You were originally in the front lines. So yeah. What led to that transition? And I think, if I'm not mistaken, you currently own started your own consulting firm. So in addition to, now you didn't just go into grants, you started your own firm. So what led that trajectory within your career?
Yeah, so when I finished undergrad, I mean, I'd known for a really long time that I wanted to be a social worker. I mean, I remember being in high school and I told someone that I wanted to be a social worker, and they said, "Why do you want to do that? You're never going to make any money." I said, "Well, it's not me. It's not about making money for me. It's about doing good things in the world and helping people." So when I graduated, as I mentioned, I took a bunch of different positions with nonprofit organizations over the course of probably 6 or 7 years. I worked in like a wilderness therapy program for a while. I worked for a child abuse prevention center. I did substance abuse counseling with adults and with adolescents, worked in like a drug court diversion program. And I got to a point where I realized that if I wanted to further my career, I needed to go back to school because I had kind of reached the top end of what I was able to do without actually having a master's of social work. And I was always having to report to someone, and I didn't have as much autonomy in the positions and control over the work that I wanted to do. And so that was really the catalyst for me to go to grad school, to get my MSW. And then when I was in school, I went to, as I mentioned, I went to NYU, which is a very clinically based, or at least at the time that I was there, it was a very clinically based educational program. So really training us how to be, therapists, basically one-on-one clinicians. And after about 6 months in school, I realized I didn't want to be a clinician. That I very much appreciated the quality of my characteristics, that people want to talk to me and want to share information with me, and that I have the capacity to be empathetic and listen. But I also recognized that for me, I wanted to have a more macro impact, a broader, I liked working with individuals, but it wasn't where my passion was. My passion was sort of working at a higher level to make broader change, or to be able to have a broader impact. And so that was actually part of the reason in my second year that I actually tried and got accepted to do that work study program. I also kind of shifted my focus to public policy at that point. And at the time, NYU didn't really have as much of a public policy program as they do now. It was sort of in the beginning stages back then. But so I took a little bit more of a macro level approach to social work. And so then when I graduated with my MSW, I looked for ways that I could have a broader impact. And, thinking back to my early career, when I worked for all these nonprofits, most of the time I was a grant funded position. So they would get a grant and they would be able to pay me to do a job. Well, then sometimes the grant would go away and I would lose my job, or we'd have to switch the focus of what I was doing because the funding wasn't there. So I had always been kind of interested in grants and kind of how they worked and how they kind of played in the nonprofit sector financial pie, as it were. And so I just pursued a career as a grant writer. I got a job as an entry-level grant writer at the Children's Hospital in Orange County. And I really learned there what a large corporate or big nonprofit looks like, what a healthy fundraising team looks like, and kind of how the nonprofit sector works from a higher level, not the on the ground work, but the higher scale. And then I found I really liked it. I mean, I never set out to be a writer by any means. I actually got an MSW because I hated math and I didn't want to do math in my job. And I spend most of my time in budgets now, which is a little bit in 990 reporting forms, which is a little bit crazy, but, and so I fell in love with the work itself. And not a lot of people set out to be a grant writer or a fundraiser. But my social work degree actually, I think, has really made me successful, or made it so that I could be successful in this field, because a lot of what I do with the clients that I work with is listen. And I listen to them tell the stories about the work that they're doing in the world and why it's important. And then I translate that into words. And then I go to people who have money and I ask them to give to that cause. And so I feel like for me, my degree in social work and the clinical training that I got at NYU, which I didn't really want, after I got into it, has served me really well in my profession. And so after being at the Children's Hospital for a couple of years, I then decided to kind of hang out shingle and see if I could do this as a consultant. And so that's been almost 7 years now. And it continues to grow. And I continue to get to work with all sorts of different nonprofit organizations, and again, having that background of social work really lends itself to that, because when you're in grad school, you get You know, you take early child development classes, you take classes on aging, you take, you know, a broad spectrum, you get a broad spectrum of education. And so now I feel competent in going out and working with a wide variety of organizations that serve these different sectors because I have that background.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah.
So Dorothy, this question is for Dorothy. So you have a very robust resume and career. Is there anything that you still haven't done that you would like to try to pursue that maybe either you haven't had that right opportunity or that you always wish that you could have done?
No, the answer is no. Though I'm really just interested, or I'm hopeful that after this pandemic, that we really will start as a society to make the changes that so many people in social work have been working on small scale. So you always say, here's a wonderful project, but how can we scale it? And then, you know, you run up into, you know, lack of funding or rules that don't make any sense, changes in direction. So I think I'm just hopeful that we can come out of this and make some real lasting changes to address long-standing problems.
And then just a follow-up question. You've been honored by the California chapter of the National Association of Social Workers as Social Worker of the Year. You've also been a recipient of the YWCA of Greater Los Angeles Credible Woman Making History Award. What do these awards mean to you as far as your career and, you know, everything that you've put into it?
Well, I think it's always so rewarding to be recognized by your colleagues. And so it just meant a lot. It was wonderful to share. They had some events around those awards, and the ability to share with my family, my immediate family, my family from up north that joined me, as, you know, and colleagues. And, you know, partly the way you get nominated for these awards. And it was really heartwarming to get nominated by the people that I work closely with, because as I said, the recognition really belonged to our collective effort for some of the really interesting work we were doing at the time, really around school-based health and social services in the Pacoima area, which is Northeast San Fernando Valley. So, you know, there were other things, and then work we were doing around healthcare, especially, you know, one of the many crises in healthcare in this county when they were closing health centers, and just kind of kept convening and working, especially after the Northridge earthquake, when health centers were closed, and making sure that funding went to the San Fernando Valley. So again, I think what it meant was both the recognition and the celebration of work that I wasn't doing, but doing in concert with great colleagues.
Great, thank you. So I have a question for Rochelle. You worked with children with disabilities, and you've also worked within the foster care communities. So for our students who are interested in pursuing either of these fields, can you tell us a little bit about them, some of the differences, some of the similarities, and some of your experiences within working within these fields?
Sure, yeah. So yeah, I've been working with, like I said, children with developmental disabilities in my earlier career. So it was really, and the families as well. So it was really positive for me to understand the disabilities that they had and how it impacts their families. And also to, I use a strength-based model with the parents, and just explaining and educating them on their children's disabilities and that sort of thing. And I work with them in different schools. And for the foster care community, yeah, I was a foster adoption social worker in San Diego for a few years, and then of course in England. And I have a really big passion for the children in the foster care system, because they, oftentimes they have a lot going on. And so when I came to Portland, I worked for the developmental disability unit. And we have lots of voluntary and involuntary foster care placements specifically designed for children with disabilities. So that's been really great, because I've been able to kind of bring my two passions together, the developmental disability world and foster care. So yeah, it's been really a great experience.
Great, thank you. Oh, and follow-up question. I know you talked a little bit about it. So how was it working overseas in comparison to working here within the same field?
Yeah, it was it was a really great experience, but it was also the way they practice social work in the UK could be really different over there. It was a very different system, and I didn't realize before going over there that oftentimes like social workers aren't really looked at over there the way they are over here. They're not as respected, I guess, in a lot of ways. And I felt like the approaches over there were a little bit more punitive in a way, but it was really great because like I said, we were able to work together, and I would learn their styles and I would also bring my style. So it was a great experience, but it was also very challenging at the same time.
Great, thank you. So Leah, I have a question for you. So right now you're currently working in consulting. So how do you continue using your background, your experience from your MSW program, and different experiences that you've had in your current day-to-day work, working with different nonprofits and different organizations that are working with our communities?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like I use it daily because sort of like I was saying, you know, my job now requires that I listen to the individuals that I work with, whether it's, you know, a college access and success program like Fulfillment Fund, or a group that's working with kids with autism, or some other nonprofit. You know, my job is to really hone in on the work that they're doing in the world. And a lot of times when I'm working with folks too, they don't necessarily know the extent of the impact that they're having. So they'll know that there's a need for whatever service that they're providing, but they might not have the words to articulate that. And so I feel like that's a skill that I learned in school in terms of like reflective listening and responsive listening. So clarifying with them, you know, that I've understood what they're telling me so that I can then go use that information to write a grant proposal. And so I used, you know, some basic skills like that, just listening and reflective listening a lot. And I think that level of sort of empathy and empathetic perspective that you get when you're in social work school, to speak, kind of going back to what Dorothy was saying earlier, looking at multiple perspectives and how people collaborate together and work together. I feel like that has been helpful to me in the work that I do currently. And even with like on collaborations, like just, you know, being aware of what's happening in different fields and being able to use those communication skills that I learned in school to be able to bridge gaps for folks, I think is another way that I use my degree a lot, or a lot of those skills that I was taught in school. And I'm drawing a little bit of a blank at anything else. I definitely use my statistics class. I use that class all the time, which was a hard class to get through, but I use the stats class all the time. Just in like pulling out data, looking at reports to be able to back up statements, you know, for the work that I do. That data and statistics class was a lifesaver to my long-term career, but when I was in it, it was not fun at all.
Great, thank you so much. Dorothy, same question. You two are also in a career that people don't normally or don't first think about when they think of an MSW program. So how do you use your experience, your background in MSW in your day-to-day work?
Well, one of the great things about getting a master's in social work is there's the direct service side, and then there's the macro policy side. And so you really get a deep understanding of how to work with individuals, how to work with groups, how to do community organizing, and what policy is about. At the same time, social work schools require that you do field placement, certain number of hours in your first year and second year, and there are all these different variations now. And I know Rochelle talked about a different kind of program she was in, that's like a part-time program. But the point is, your field placements are in different fields. So you really learn issues. I mean, when I went to school, I think I worked in the Department of Public Health in the first year. I can't remember what I did in the second year. It'll come to me. But anyway, you really just get exposed. And then fellow students work in different fields. So it's a real chance to learn learn technical skills, but just also learn about fields of practice. And especially when you learn around, and maybe this was my doctoral program, but the history of social work, what happens at the government levels, how that translates from the feds to the states to local communities, how that impacts what agencies can and can't do. So I find that there's just a way of understanding the health and social service and human service sectors that I began to learn, in graduate school and continue to learn about.
Great, thank you. Rochelle, I have a question, and this is probably going to apply to some of our students as well. You had to work during your MSW program, so it was a lot of balancing of different things. So how were you? Tell us about that experience of not only having to do a graduate school program, which is difficult on its own, but also having to work.
Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely challenging, but well worth it. I think a big thing is you have to be really organized, and you also have to, I think, have like a really good support system, because the people around me, my family and friends, made all the difference. And it took a lot of discipline too, because I'm working full time, and then of course on my downtime I would have to study and then do my internship as well. So I again had to be really disciplined and like maybe not hang out with people as much or go on those fun trips and do all that. So it was a sacrifice. But like I said, it was well worth it. I think being very purposeful about your time and how you set it up is going to be really, really important. It also makes you stronger, because being in social work, like we talked about before, there's a lot going on at times, and I think self-care and just really understanding yourself and how the work impacts you is huge.
Great. And then I'm going to ask this question for all of you. Can you all tell me what you enjoyed most about your MSW program? So Rochelle, we can just go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, I love that I got an MSW. I really believe it fit my personality, my passions of what I wanted to do or what I want to do. And it was a really great step to like really understanding just everything, psychology better, communities, and how to make a real impact. So it's been invaluable. I don't regret it at all.
Great, thank you. Dorothy?
What's memorable is very interesting. I went to Berkeley during the 70s, during the free speech movement and People's Park. And at that time, Berkeley was on the quarter system. And it was very interesting. We never had the third quarter because of all the protests. So that's it's a funny thing to remember. But as a result of that, I got to audit lots of courses. I got to see just how people protest issues. So, I sort of got an education outside of classes and inside. So it's ironic. That's what I remember about it. My doctoral program was much different. And what I remember about that was how anxiety producing it was, and I had to remind myself, hey, there must be something about the environment, because before I started this program, I was functioning okay without constant anxiety. So there must be something about the environment and not only me.
Great, thank you, Dorothy. Leah?
I think one of the greatest things I got out of getting my master's is really something that Dorothy was actually just talking about in terms of the other students and getting to learn from and connect with the other students and hear about their experiences. I was older when I went back to school, so I was almost 30 when I started my master's degree program. And there were a lot of what I would call people in my program that were a lot younger than me. But we were really able to connect and to bond over these different experiences that we were having kind of out in the field and kind of troubleshoot our internship, challenges, whether it was with a supervisor or a client. And I really developed some pretty unique bonds with people, because I think when you're in the field of social work and you're dealing with like raw human emotion and real issues, you can't help but just be honest and be open and get support from people around you. And so I have some friends from that era of my life that are still really important to me and still very much a part of my world, even though we live very far from each other. But I think for me, that was one of the most valuable things I got out of it. And, I think there's something inherent in social workers where we're kind. We're kind people who want to do good things in the world. And so we tend to be really good friends. And so I feel like for me, that was one of the best things that I got out of my program, not necessarily on the academic side, but just on the human connection side.
Great, thank you. And just to follow up with that, so we talked about some of the positives, right? But there's also challenges. So can you tell us what you felt was the most challenging thing about your program?
The statistics class, for sure. Anything having to do with math. A little bit of balance. So like I mentioned, I'd been out of school for a long time. I'd been working, and then I was going to school and working at the same time. So figuring out how to balance all of that. I definitely went into grad school with a feeling of like that I want to say I didn't believe I should be there, but it was, getting a master's degree is a big deal. And I think I felt this inadequacy a little bit of like, I have this need to perform and to be perfect, I think. And so I think that was difficult for me to kind of figure out how to navigate that and balance that out a little bit, and recognize that it just takes hard work and dedication, like Rochelle was saying, like balancing, work and school and setting boundaries. But I think that was difficult for me at first because I had worked for so long that getting back into that educational mindset was pretty hard for me. So I would say those are probably my two biggest challenges.
Great, thank you. Dorothy, what would you say was the most challenging thing about your program?
I think it's what Leah was saying, the kind of expectations, especially as you're older, because certainly when I wasn't old, but when I went back for my doctorate, it's like you're older, you want to perform well, and you expect a lot of yourself. And the only other thing I wanted to add, because Leah made me think about it, which is the other side of graduate school, it's really the friendships and relationships. And I made a best friend in the doctoral program. We were 30 years apart. She's 30 years older than I am. Interesting. So the age difference didn't matter. And she was and has been an incredible role model, and died late last year at the age of 102. So really a lifelong friend. So that's one of the very special things, and it's exactly what you said. It's because social work is a field for people, which is great.
Great, thank you. And Rochelle, same question?
Yeah, so for me, like we talked about, just that balance of working full-time, trying to just have a life and going to school at the same time. And also, I'm a first generation, and so I didn't really have a lot of family who've been through the process. So at times it was sometimes difficult for people to like fully understand what I was going through. And going back to what Leah said, so I have to this day very close friends from the graduate program. Another big challenge for me, like I mentioned, I worked at the Children's Hospital, or I interned at the Children's Hospital, and that was like the first time I actually was really exposed to a lot of the real, abuse and that sort of thing. And so I don't think at the time I was fully prepared or expected how much that would impact me, because in social work, like we hear, the most terrible stories. And so for me, I really had to, work on that and try to figure out how to have the barriers and how to work through that, because you are dealing with real life trauma and, other people's trauma. So that's another really important.
Great, thank you. And we ran out of time, so what I'm going to do is just ask each of you to give maybe a last piece of advice for any of our students that are considering pursuing an MSW program. So Rochelle, we'll start with you. Just last bit of advice from your experience for anybody who's considering pursuing this career.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, social work is a very rewarding career, and to really think about it and yeah, know what you want to do. If this is really it's really your passion, you should totally do it. And it's absolutely an investment and worth it in your life and career. So. Thank
you. Leah?
Yeah, I mean, I would second everything that Rochelle said. I think pursuing it. I mean, I think there can be a lot of disparaging folks who, particularly on the sort of long-term income side, in terms of social work careers and social work jobs. But if you're really passionate about it and you really are interested in making a difference in the world, like, there is no better way than through social work. There's such a broad spectrum of fields that you can go into and areas where you can have an impact. So if you're at all interested in it, I would say, go for it, pursue it. Just keep your eyes open.
Great, thank you. Dorothy?
Yeah, I'd say it's, there's so many opportunities. So you never know when you go into social work where you're going to wind up in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and people morph in and out. And don't be turned off by the salaries, because there really are opportunities. There are career ladders. And then the other thing is, do your homework about which schools, because as Rochelle said, think about the loans, think about at least the beginning fields that you're interested in, and then good old persistence, and make some good friends on the way.